They called her to the principal's office for defending herself against bullies, dismissing her as just another troubled teenager making up stories for attention. The 17-year-old girl sat quietly as the school administrators mocked her claim that her father was a Green Beret. Impossible, they laughed. Women don't serve in special forces. Their smirks faded when the door opened and 5 uniformed figures entered, led by a woman whose commanding presence instantly silenced the room. The principal's face drained of color as she realized her terrible mistake. Welcome to Secrets Never Told. Before we begin this powerful story of hidden courage and unexpected vindication, tell me in the comments from which city in the world are you watching this video today. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, hit that subscribe button and help us honor those who served in ways we never knew. Madison Riley sat in the uncomfortable plastic chair outside Principal Margaret Hoffman's office, her knuckles still scraped from the altercation that had landed her there. The hallways of Westfield High School buzzed with the typical afternoon chaos, lockers slamming, students rushing to catch buses, the distant echo of basketball practice in the gymnasium. At 17, Madison had learned to keep her head down and avoid attention. Her dark hair fell across her face like a protective curtain, and she wore the same faded jeans and oversized hoodie that served as her daily uniform. Nothing about her suggested trouble, which made the current situation all the more frustrating. "Madison Riley, please come in," came the stern voice of Ms. Janet Cooper, the vice principal, from the doorway. Inside the office, Principal Hoffman sat behind her imposing oak desk, flanked by Cooper and school counselor Dr. Patricia Wells. The setup felt more like a tribunal than a disciplinary meeting, with Madison facing 3 adults whose expressions ranged from disapproval to barely concealed disdain. "Sit down, Madison," Principal Hoffman said, gesturing to the lone chair positioned directly in front of the desk. "We need to discuss what happened in the cafeteria today." Madison remained silent, her hands folded in her lap. She'd learned long ago that explaining herself rarely improved these situations. "According to witnesses," Vice Principal Cooper began, consulting her notes, "you initiated a physical altercation with 3 other students. That's assault, Madison. We're considering suspension. They were harassing Emily Martinez about her accent." Madison finally spoke, her voice quiet but steady, calling her names, throwing food at her table. "I asked them to stop." Dr. Wells, the counselor, leaned forward with the practiced concern of someone who dealt with hundreds of troubled teenagers. "Madison, we understand you may have been trying to help, but violence is never the answer. There are proper channels for reporting bullying." Madison's jaw tightened. She'd tried the proper channels before. The result was always the same: promises of investigation that led nowhere while the harassment continued. "Those boys have been targeting Emily for weeks," Madison said. "I filed 3 reports with the office. Nothing happened." Principal Hoffman's expression hardened. "That's not accurate, Madison. We take all bullying reports seriously. Perhaps if you'd been more patient with the process." "Patient?" Madison looked up sharply. "While they destroyed her lunch and called her a wetback, how long should she wait for you to take it seriously?" The room fell silent. Vice Principal Cooper made a note on her pad, clearly marking Madison's response as defiant. "Your attitude is part of the problem," Principal Hoffman said coldly. "This isn't the first time you've been involved in altercation. Your file shows a pattern of aggressive behavior." Madison stared at her hands. The pattern, they referenced, consisted of 3 incidents over 2 years, each time defending classmates who couldn't defend themselves. But she'd learned that context rarely mattered in these meetings. "We've called your guardian," Dr. Wells announced, consulting her own folder. "Your aunt will be here shortly to discuss your behavior and possible consequences." "She's not my guardian," Madison said quietly. The 3 adults exchanged glances. Principal Hoffman flipped through Madison's file with obvious irritation. "Madison, according to our records, you've been living with your Aunt Linda Riley since—" She paused, reading, "since your mother's death 3 years ago. Where exactly do you think your guardian is?" "My father." The silence stretched uncomfortably before Vice Principal Cooper spoke. "Madison, your father isn't listed as your guardian. In fact, there's no father listed in your records at all." Madison's hands clenched in her lap. "He's deployed. Special Forces. That's why I live with my aunt temporarily." Dr. Wells' expression shifted to what she probably thought was gentle understanding. "Madison, sometimes when we're dealing with loss and trauma, we create stories to help us cope. It's natural to want to believe someone is coming to help us." "I'm not making anything up." Principal Hoffman leaned back in her chair. "Madison, we're not here to judge whatever family situation you've created to deal with your circumstances, but we are here to address your behavior at school." The casual dismissal stung more than Madison expected. She'd endured 3 years of similar conversations, teachers, counselors, even some of her aunt's friends, all treating her father's existence like a fantasy she'd invented to cope with abandonment. "My father is Staff Sergeant Emma Riley, 5th Special Forces Group," Madison said, her voice stronger now. "She's been deployed for for 18 months. Before that, she was stationed at Fort Bragg. The reaction was immediate. Vice Principal Cooper actually laughed, a short, sharp sound that echoed in the small office. "Madison," Principal Hoffman said with exaggerated patience, "women don't serve in special forces. They're not allowed in Green Beret units. It's simply not possible." Dr. Wells nodded sympathetically. "Sweetheart, I understand the appeal of imagining a strong parent figure, especially someone in the military, but you're describing something that doesn't exist." Madison felt heat rising in her cheeks. "She does exist. She's my mother." "I thought you said your father," Cooper interjected, still smirking. "My mother is my father. She transitioned when I was younger, but she's still my dad. She raised me after Mom died." The three women exchanged looks that Madison had seen countless times, the mixture of pity and dismissal that adults wore when they thought a child was lying or delusional. "Madison," Principal Hoffman said slowly, as if speaking to someone much younger, "I think we need to focus on what's real here. Your behavioral issues, your academic performance, and finding healthy ways to deal with whatever family trauma you've experienced." "She's not trauma. She's real, honey." Dr. Wells leaned forward. "Women cannot serve as Green Berets. The military doesn't allow it. Whatever story you've been telling yourself about your parent, it's not based in reality." Madison stared at the floor, fighting back tears of frustration. 3 years of this. 3 years of having her father's service dismissed, her family situation mocked, her truth treated like a delusion. "I have pictures," she said quietly. "Pictures can be misleading," Cooper replied. "People in uniform don't necessarily serve in the roles they claim." "She has commendations, awards, orders." Principal Hoffman sighed heavily. "Madison, we're not here to debate your family mythology. We're here because you assaulted 3 other students today." The word mythology hit like a slap. Madison looked up, her eyes blazing with anger she rarely allowed herself to show. "It's not mythology. My father serves this country. She's saved lives. She's earned every decoration she wears, and she's twice the person any of you are." The room erupted in uncomfortable shifting and exchanged glances. Dr. Wells scribbled notes rapidly, probably marking Madison as increasingly unstable. "I think," Principal Hoffman said carefully, "we need to schedule some counseling sessions to help you process these fantasies in a healthier way." "They're not fantasies." "Madison, calm down," Cooper warned. "Your aggressive behavior is exactly what we're talking about." Madison stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "You don't know anything about my family. You don't know anything about service or sacrifice or what it means to protect people who can't protect themselves." "Sit down, Madison," Principal Hoffman commanded. "Just like you didn't know anything about protecting Emily Martinez from those bullies." The accusation hung in the air like a challenge. Principal Hoffman's face reddened with anger. "Young lady, you are walking a very thin line. One more outburst and you'll be facing suspension, possibly expulsion." Madison remained standing, her fists clenched at her sides. 3 years of bottled frustration threatened to overflow. "My father didn't risk her life overseas so people like you could ignore bullying and then punish kids for standing up to bullies. Your father," Dr. Wells said with practiced calm, "doesn't exist in the way you've described. And until you accept that reality, these behavioral issues will continue." The door opened suddenly, interrupting the tense standoff. Aunt Linda Riley entered, looking harried and apologetic. At 45, Linda bore enough resemblance to Madison to make their relationship obvious, but her nervous energy and constant apologies created a stark contrast to Madison's stubborn defiance. "I'm so sorry," Linda began before anyone spoke. "I came as soon as I got your call. Madison, what have you done now?" The question stung, not what happened or are you okay, just immediate assumption of guilt. "Ms. Riley," Principal Hoffman stood to greet Linda. "Thank you for coming. We need to discuss Madison's continuing behavioral problems." As Linda took a seat beside Madison, the 3 administrators launched into their account of the day's events, peppered with references to Madison's delusional claims about her father and the need for psychological intervention. Madison watched her aunt's face during the recitation, seeing the familiar mixture of embarrassment and resignation that appeared whenever Madison's father was mentioned. "I'm afraid Madison has been quite insistent about this fantasy military parent," Dr. Wells concluded. "It's clearly affecting her ability to process reality appropriately." Linda shifted uncomfortably. "Madison, we've talked about this. You need to stop telling people about Emma." The use of her father's name, spoken like an embarrassment rather than with pride, made Madison's chest tighten. "She's deployed, Aunt Linda. She's not dead. She's not made up. She's serving her country. Madison, please." Linda's voice carried the weariness of someone who'd had this conversation many times. "These people are trying to help you." Principal Hoffman leaned forward. "Ms. Riley, we understand this is a sensitive family situation, but Madison's inability to distinguish between fantasy and reality is affecting her education and her behavior toward other students." "She's not fantasy," Madison whispered, but her voice lacked its earlier conviction. Even her own aunt was siding with them. Vice Principal Cooper consulted her notes. "We're recommending mandatory counseling sessions and possible suspension pending a psychological evaluation." The room fell silent, except for the ticking of the wall clock and the distant sounds of after-school activities in the hallway. Madison stared at her hands, feeling more isolated than she had since her mother's funeral. Then, from somewhere in the distance, came the sound of heavy footsteps in the corridor, multiple pairs of boots moving with military precision against the polished floors. Dr. Wells frowned, glancing toward the door. "That's unusual. School security shouldn't be conducting drills at this time." The footsteps grew louder, more distinct. Madison's head came up slowly, recognition dawning in her eyes. Principal Hoffman stood, moving toward her office window that faced the main corridor. "I don't see any security personnel." The footsteps stopped directly outside the office door. A sharp knock echoed through the room, not the tentative tap of a student or the casual knock of a colleague, but the authoritative rap of someone accustomed to command. "Come in," Principal Hoffman called, her voice uncertain. The door opened to reveal 5 figures in military dress uniform. The woman leading them wore the distinctive green beret of the U.S. Army Special Forces, her uniform decorated with ribbons and badges that spoke of years of distinguished service. Behind her stood 4 other soldiers, their bearing unmistakably military, their expressions professionally neutral but alert. The woman removed her beret as she entered, revealing close-cropped auburn hair and eyes that immediately found Madison across the room. Despite the masculine cut of her uniform and her authoritative bearing, her features carried a femininity that made her gender unquestionably clear. "Good afternoon," she said, her voice carrying the controlled authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "I'm Staff Sergeant Emma Riley, United States Army Special Forces. I believe you've been discussing my daughter." The silence that followed was absolute. Principal Hoffman stood frozen by her window, her mouth slightly open. Vice Principal Cooper's pen had stopped mid-note. Dr. Wells stared with undisguised shock. Only Linda Riley seemed capable of movement, half rising from her chair before sinking back down as if her legs wouldn't support her. "Staff Sergeant Riley," the woman continued, her gaze moving from face to face. "I received an emergency communication that my daughter was being detained and questioned about the validity of my military service." Madison felt tears spring to her eyes, not from sadness, but from a relief so overwhelming it nearly knocked her from her chair. Her father was here. After 18 months of deployment, after 3 years of having her existence denied, Staff Sergeant Emma Riley stood in the principal's office in full uniform, undeniably real. We had no way of knowing," Principal Hoffman stammered. One of the soldiers behind Staff Sergeant Riley stepped forward. "Ma'am, I'm Sergeant First Class Rodriguez. We're here on direct orders from Colonel Martinez to address what appears to be a significant misunderstanding regarding Staff Sergeant Riley's family situation." Another soldier, a woman with Master Sergeant stripes, spoke next. "For the record, Staff Sergeant Riley has served with distinction in the 5th Special Forces Group for 8 years. Her service record includes 2 combat deployments and numerous commendations." Staff Sergeant Riley moved to Madison's chair, placing a gentle but firm hand on her daughter's shoulder. The contact was electric. Madison could feel the strength and warmth she remembered from childhood, the absolute security of knowing her father was there. "Madison," Emma said quietly, "are you all right?" Madison nodded, not trusting her voice. Emma turned back to the 3 administrators, her expression hardening. "I understand there's been some confusion about women serving in Special Forces roles. Let me clarify. The military has been integrating qualified women into special operations for several years. I am one of those women." Dr. Wells found her voice furt. But the regulation have changed," Sergeant First Class Rodriguez interjected. "Staff Sergeant Riley completed the Special Forces qualification course and has served in operational roles since 2019. Principal Hoffman struggled to regain her composure. "Staff Sergeant, we had no way of knowing. Madison's records don't list you as her guardian, and frankly, her claims seemed what?" Emma's voice carried a dangerous quiet. "Impossible," Cooper finished weakly. The Master Sergeant stepped forward. "Ma'am, with respect, questioning the service record of a Special Forces soldier based on gender assumptions represents a serious misunderstanding of current military policy." Emma's attention remained focused on the administrators. "My daughter has been in your care for 3 years. During that time, you've consistently dismissed her truthful statements about her family, treated her father's military service as a delusion, and apparently failed to protect her from bullying while punishing her for standing up to bullies." The accusations hung in the air like artillery shells waiting to explode. "We follow proper procedures," Principal Hoffman said defensively. "Do you?" Emma's voice remained controlled, but Madison could hear the steel beneath it. My daughter was physically defending another student from harassment. Your response was to punish her and recommend psychological evaluation for telling the truth about her family. Linda Riley finally found her voice. Emma, I tried to handle things quietly. I thought it would be easier if Madison didn't talk about you at school. Emma turned to her sister-in-law, and Madison saw pain flicker across her features. Linda, I appreciate everything you've done for Madison, but asking her to hide her family, to pretend her father doesn't exist, isn't protecting her. It's teaching her to be ashamed of who we are. I never meant— I know you didn't. Emma's voice softened slightly. But the result has been 3 years of my daughter being treated like she's delusional for telling the truth. One of the male soldiers, a staff sergeant with airborne wings, addressed the school officials directly. Ma'am, we need to understand the full scope of how this situation developed. Staff Sergeant Riley's service record and family status are well documented through military channels. Dr. Wells looked between Emma and Madison, confusion evident on her face. But Madison referred to you as both her father and her mother. Emma nodded. I'm transgender. I transitioned several years ago, but I remain Madison's father in every way that matters. My military service continued without interruption, and my family relationship with Madison hasn't changed. The military allows— Principal Hoffman began. The military allows qualified soldiers to serve regardless of gender identity, as long as they meet performance standards, the Master Sergeant confirmed. Staff Sergeant Riley meets and exceeds all requirements for her role. Madison watched the administrators process this information, seeing their worldview reshaping in real time. Everything they'd dismissed as impossible was standing in front of them in uniform, with documentation and witnesses. I think, Emma said carefully, we need to discuss how this school plans to address the educational environment my daughter has endured for 3 years. The question was clearly a demand, not a request. Principal Hoffman straightened, attempting to regain some authority. Staff Sergeant, we're prepared to work with you to ensure Madison has appropriate support moving forward. That's encouraging. Let's start with the disciplinary action you were planning to take against her for defending another student from bullying. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Given the circumstances, Vice Principal Cooper said slowly, perhaps we should reconsider. Perhaps you should, Sergeant First Class Rodriguez agreed, especially considering that Staff Sergeant Riley's daughter was exhibiting the same protective instincts her father demonstrates in military service. Emma squeezed Madison's shoulder gently. Madison, why don't you wait outside while I discuss some details with your school administrators? Madison stood, but hesitated. Dad, are you staying? I'm here for 2 weeks' leave, Emma replied. We'll have plenty of time to catch up. As Madison moved toward the door, she heard Emma's voice take on a different tone, still controlled, but carrying unmistakable authority. Now, let's discuss how this school plans to address 3 years of educational neglect and the systematic dismissal of my daughter's truthful statements about her family. Outside in the hallway, Madison sat on a bench and finally allowed herself to smile. For the first time in 3 years, someone believed her. More than believed her. Her father was here, in uniform, making it impossible for anyone to deny the truth she'd carried alone for so long. 20 minutes later, Emma emerged from the office, followed by the other soldiers. The school administrators remained inside, presumably processing the new reality they'd been forced to confront. Ready to go home? Emma asked. Madison nodded, falling into step beside her father as they walked through the halls of Westfield High. Students and teachers stopped to stare at the military procession, whispers following in their wake. Near the main entrance, they passed Emily Martinez at her locker. The girl looked up nervously, clearly recognizing Madison despite the unusual circumstances. Emma paused. Are you Emily? The girl nodded. I'm Madison's father. I understand you've been having some difficulties with harassment at school. Emily glanced at Madison, then back at Emma. Madison helped me today. She got in trouble because of me. She got in trouble because she did the right thing. Emma corrected gently. That's something to be proud of, not sorry about. Outside, as they approached a military vehicle parked in the visitor's space, Madison finally spoke. Dad, how did you know to come? Emma paused beside the vehicle. Linda called the base emergency contact line. She was worried about the counseling requirements and thought I should know. Madison looked surprised. Aunt Linda called you? She's been keeping me informed about your situation for months. She was trying to protect you from more scrutiny, but she realized today that approach wasn't working. They drove in comfortable silence for several miles before Madison asked the question that had haunted her for 3 years. Why couldn't you tell them who you were before? Why did I have to keep it secret? Emma pulled into the driveway of the modest house Madison shared with her aunt. Because military families in situations like ours face additional security considerations. My unit was involved in classified operations, and having family information widely known could have created risks. But you're here now because my deployment status has changed. I'm transitioning to a training role that allows more normal family contact. Emma turned to face Madison. And because my daughter needed me to be here, That evening, as they sat in Linda's living room catching up on 3 years of separation, Madison showed Emma the scrapbook she'd maintained. Newspaper clippings about Special Forces operations, military articles, anything that validated her father's service even when no one believed it existed. "I saved everything," Madison said. "Every time someone said women couldn't be Green Berets, I looked for proof they were wrong." Emma flipped through pages of carefully preserved articles, her expression growing more thoughtful with each page. "Madison, I need you to understand something. The reason I couldn't be open about my service wasn't just military policy. It was also because I was afraid." Madison looked up, surprised. Her father had never admitted to being afraid of anything. Afraid of what? Afraid that if people knew the truth about me, about being transgender, about the complexity of our family, they would use that information to hurt you. I thought keeping it quiet would protect you from prejudice and questions. Madison considered this. "But it didn't protect me. It made me feel like you were something to be ashamed of." Emma nodded slowly. "That was my mistake. I should have trusted you to handle the truth, and I should have trusted that the people in your life would respect our family once they understood it." Over the following weeks, Emma's presence at the school created a gradual but noticeable shift. Teachers who had dismissed Madison's claims suddenly remembered her more positively. Administrators who had planned disciplinary action found reasons to praise her protective instincts instead. The bullying of Emily Martinez stopped entirely after word spread that Madison's father was not only real, but actively monitoring the situation. Most significantly, Madison no longer felt the need to hide or minimize her family situation. When classmates asked about her father, she answered honestly and proudly. 2 weeks later, as Emma prepared to return to her new assignment, she and Madison stood together in the school parking lot after a parent-teacher conference that had gone very differently from the meeting that had brought Emma to Westfield. "The teachers seem surprised that you're interested in Madison's education," Emma observed. "They expected someone like me to be absent or disengaged," Madison replied. "They didn't expect a Special Forces soldier to care about algebra grades and college applications." Emma smiled. "Military parents care about the same things all parents care about. We just express it differently sometimes." A car pulled up nearby, and Emily Martinez got out with her mother. The woman approached hesitantly, clearly nervous about addressing a uniformed soldier. "Excuse me, are you Madison's father?" Emma nodded. "I wanted to thank you. What Madison did for Emily, standing up to those boys, it meant everything to our family. Madison learned to stand up for people who need protection," Emma replied. "That's a lesson worth learning, even if it sometimes gets you in trouble at school." Emily stepped forward. "Madison, are you still going to eat lunch with me tomorrow?" Madison smiled. "Of course. Why wouldn't I?" As the Martinez family departed, Emma turned to Madison. "You know, the best part of military service isn't the recognition or the respect. It's knowing that the principles you fight for continue in the next generation. Is that why you serve? For me, I serve for a lot of reasons. But knowing that my daughter has the courage to defend people who need protection, that makes everything else worth it." 6 months later, Madison stood at her high school graduation, scanning the crowd for her father's familiar uniform. Emma had returned from her assignment specifically for the ceremony, sitting in the front row beside Linda and beaming with unmistakable pride. When Madison's name was called and she walked across the stage, the applause seemed longer and more genuine than for other graduates. Her classmates had learned who she really was over the course of the year, and many had developed a new respect for the quiet girl who had always been willing to stand up for others. As she shook the principal's hand, Madison caught sight of Dr. Wells in the audience. The counselor who had once recommended psychological evaluation for Madison's delusions now applauded with obvious admiration. After the ceremony, as families gathered for photographs and celebration, Emily Martinez approached with her parents. "Madison, we wanted to give you something," Emily said, handing her a small wrapped packet. Inside was a framed photograph. The moment Madison had stood between Emily and her tormentors in the cafeteria, captured by a student's phone camera. Below the image, Emily had written, "For the girl who showed me what courage looks like." Emma appeared beside Madison, still in dress uniform, her green beret perfectly positioned. "Ready to celebrate?" she asked. Madison looked around at the crowd. Classmates who now knew her truth, teachers who respected her family, and her father standing proudly beside her in the uniform that represented everything she'd defended for years. "I'm ready for anything," Madison replied. As they walked toward the parking lot together, Emma put her arm around Madison's shoulders. "You know, the most important battles aren't always fought on foreign soil. Sometimes they're fought in cafeterias and principals' offices says, by teenagers brave enough to stand up for truth even when no one believes them. Madison smiled, leaning into her father's embrace. I learned from the best. In the distance, the sun set behind Westfield High School, casting long shadows across the parking lot where a Special Forces soldier and her daughter walked together toward whatever challenges lay ahead. Their bond strengthened by years of separation and vindicated by the courage to never stop fighting for truth. Have you ever defended a truth that no one believed? Someone whose quiet strength inspired you to stand up for what's right even when it cost you? Share their story in the comments below. And if you believe these hidden heroes deserve recognition, subscribe to help us honor those who served in ways we're only beginning to understand.